Welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking inside North Korea with the United States' former chief negotiator to North Korea from 2005 to 2009. Christopher Hill joins us from the University of Denver in Colorado. France 24's own Uni Hung is with us here. So is Jean-François Dimeglio of the Paris-based Asia Center. And Marcus Noland of the Peterson Institute, whose latest book, Witness to Transformation, included countless interviews with refugees who had fled North Korea. As promised, we're now going to show you some exclusive footage from inside North Korea. Now, for reporters, the France 24 investigative news magazine, Cyril Payen was able to enter on one of only 3,000 tourist visas that are issued to Westerners each year. He used a home video camera while carefully trying to stay under the radar of his handlers. He did indeed, though, get Pyongyang's version of the full tour, including a surprising visit to the countryside.
Cars in North Korea are a rarity. Even bikes aren't often seen. There are still, however, a few temples.
Today, the Korean monks in our country enjoying their freedom of this country.
Freedom here is a relative term. To the outside world, they seem anything but.
When President Kim Il-sung and leader Kim Jong-il visited these temples, they gave the valuable lessons to restoration of these temples. So later they sent a lot of funding and distribution of these temples.
You're now shooting?
Huh?
You're now shooting?
No.
But I thought, frankly, that there is no religion.
Our country?
Yes.
No. Our country has Christians, monks, and Buddhists. Our country has a few church and many temples.
Okay.
But people don't want to go there because they're very busy. Don't think about Jesus. Not enough time to think about that.
It's true that North Koreans have a lot to do. The nation's 25 million inhabitants are subjected to a rigorous routine of daily chores and collective work. Under constant monitoring, guided by the inspiration of Kim Il-sung, the father of the nation's system of Jewish self-reliance.
And a little bit later on, you can see that full report in Reporters, the France 24 investigative news magazine. Uni, you were mentioning in part one of our discussion the fall of the Berlin Wall 2 decades ago. Mm-hmm. You were living in Seoul at the time. At the time, did you think, well, it's only a matter of time before there's a thaw for good in relations between the two Koreas, perhaps even the country becomes reunited?
No, I always felt completely isolated from the rest of the world in the sense that I felt that no one, for the West, the Cold War was ending with the fall of the Berlin Wall.
But for you, it continues to this day.
We're still at a ceasefire with the North. The war actually never ended.
In spite of the Sunshine Policy, which just took place 10 years after the events that we're mentioning, because there was a period which is forgotten by now, which was the Sunshine Policy, and both Koreas were supposed to talk together.
It was a very expensive handshake.
Exactly, that's what most Koreans think now. Yeah.
Yes. No, and I remember I've had conversations.
So you were lucid at the time. You knew that this was not going to concern you in any respect.
No, I knew that the situation was completely different, that Eastern Europe, behind the Iron Curtain, they got broadcasting from the West, whether they wanted it or not. I knew North Korea was not like that at all. And I really felt that that South Korea's isolation was proportional to North Korea's isolation, that people would not understand what position we were in, no matter how rich the country became, no matter how well exposed, they would not understand the unique position politically and the danger that we were in, or the danger that I keenly felt at the time.
Now, just a reminder of how tense the situation remains between those two nations. As Uni was saying, officially still at war. North Korea, this Monday, test firing a short-range missile on its eastern coast, the very same day it announced Kim Jong-il's death. South Koreans say through a government spokesperson that they believe it's probably not linked to the announcement of their leader's death. Christopher Hill, do you agree?
You know, it might well not be linked. I don't think we should make too much of a missile, short-range missile test. They've had a number of those in the past. I think, though, much more importantly is we do need to keep an eye on the activities of the KPA, whether they will try this kind of provocation and what their command and control structure is like as they go through what is clearly going to be a bit of a succession crisis. So hard to say whether it's linked, but I'm not sure that matters so much. I think the broader issue of KPA behavior is very important.
Christopher Hill, the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Bill Richardson, says the situation could become extremely volatile. What the North Korean military does in the next 24 to 48 hours will be decisive. Do you agree with that?
I would need to know the basis for saying that as opposed to next week or next month. I do believe the KPA is a very important institution. You know, North Korea has seen kind of a withering away of the Communist Party and a replacement by this sort of overall committee structure, which is dominated by the KPA. So I think their behavior is very important. I'm not sure I would support the notion that it has to do with this very short run, the implication being whether or not they support Kim Jong-un. I think they've already said they would, but I think the real proof of the pudding will be in the coming weeks, months, and maybe even years.
Marcus Noland, we know, of course, that relations between Pyongyang and Seoul wax and wane. Generally speaking, how tense is that demilitarized zone between the North and South right now?
Well, it's quite tense. The South Korean military, understandably, went on to high alert. I think the real risks that we face over the next, as Ambassador Hill said, months and possibly years, really stem from Kim Jong-un's weakness, not his strength. There are two possibilities. One is that he has trouble establishing real control. And this kind of committee system they set up is too loose, and various factions or organs of the state are kind of going off in their own direction. And you can imagine provocations or foreign policy tensions arising from that. But I think even more risky is the possibility that in order to burnish his own credentials and to try to depict himself as a strong, capable leader, that he will be tempted to engage in provocations. Another nuclear test is one obvious possibility, but we could see military provocations along the lines that we have seen in the last 18 months. So I think that the next year or two could be quite dangerous, but that danger stems from his weakness, not his strength.
Christopher Hill, how nuclear-enabled is Pyongyang right now?
Well, we know they've exploded some nuclear devices. We know they are busy with a uranium enrichment process. We don't know how far they've gotten with that, but we do know they have some plutonium, and they've declared that amount of plutonium to us. We don't know the extent to which they've been able to take a nuclear explosive device, a bomb, in other words, and actually put it on a deliverable system, that is a missile. I suspect they've not yet done that, but I suspect they are very much trying to do that, and for that reason, I think the whole issue of disarming them does take on a certain urgency. And again, I think it is very, very important that we are in touch with the Chinese to make clear that this project, this element of our policy to North Korea, we really need to see some progress.
We'll pick up on that point of the Chinese in a moment, but let me just ask you, Christopher Hill, when you were heading those negotiations in what was called, for those who don't know, it's six-party talks, because they included Russia, China, the U.S., South Korea, of course, and North Korea. Did you have a feeling, because you were there at a time when you sort of did make headway, did you have a feeling that they were bargaining from a position of weakness or a position of strength?
You know, I would never suggest they're in a position of strength. I think there's a lot of exaggeration about the notion that Kim Jong-il was somehow playing a good hand. I mean, they ended up getting some fuel oil. I mean, not very much. It's long since gone. and they also got taken off something called the State Sponsors of Terrorism, and that's a list that of countries that the U.S. government is not allowed to provide military equipment to, that sort of thing. They didn't get a lot out of this process. I must say the problem has been, however, that not surprisingly, they have not been honest in the process. And earlier on, because the U.S. didn't engage in it, there was a lot of criticism in the U.S., especially among a kind of left-leaning South Korean public, that somehow the United States was responsible for North Korea's nuclear aspirations. I don't think we have that problem anymore. I think the real issue is the fact that the North Koreans, when we got to the point of verification, they just wanted us to be able to verify their plutonium programs, which we can already verify or not from so-called national technical means. We needed the door open to verify their uranium enrichment programs and what was going on there, and they refused to allow us to do that, and that's why the talks ended so precipitously in the fall of '08.
Okay, and we can again look at a map of the two Koreas. Uni was mentioning a moment ago, we were talking about the demilitarized zone. Key to Pyongyang's isolation, though, when you look at that map, is as you can see there, the demilitarized zone, heavily fortified. What's key is China. The cooperation or lack of, depending on the situation of China. Beijing, which this Monday described, quote, Comrade Kim Jong-il as the great leader of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
We believe the North Korean people will definitely be able to turn sorrow into strength and remain united as one people to drive forward the continuity of the country's socialist cause.
Now, if you go in cold, Jean-François Di Meglio, on a statement like that one, you think, oh, they're best of friends.
Yes, of course. There's nothing in China which is intended to show any distance towards North Korea. And very often we have to talk to some Chinese authorities or quasi-diplomats, and we talk about the Korean issue. And they always make a point at saying that in any incident which could happen between the two Koreas, South Korea is at least as guilty as North Korea. So they always...
They preface their remarks with that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there is another thing that towards outsiders, China is very adamant at, which is that apart from the six-party talks, which currently are kind of ailing, there is no tribune, no place where China is ready to talk to third parties about North Korea. It's kind of their thing. Now, if we look at it more acutely, of course, there are lots of dissent within China.
I was going to say, well, how do the Chinese really feel about the North Koreans?
If I may say, of course, we cannot say that there is a good moment or a bad moment for Kim Jong-un to pass away. But it's not necessarily the best moment for Chinese. Why? Because this is what we call an election year as well in China. There is a passing over of the power in China next year. And everyone is positioning himself or herself vis-à-vis the main global issues and also vis-à-vis the main internal issues, including the military one. You do have hawks and you do have doves in China as well. And obviously, the hawks are not in favor of having a war between the two Koreas or having North Korea triggering a global war, not at all. But they insist that North Korea is very important in this regional setup, and they do need North Korea as a counterbalance to other powers in the region. Other ones would say that, yes, there is a need to support North Korea, but only to a certain extent. And beyond that extent, of course, there are certain things that you cannot support in North Korea. And last but not least, China also needs North Korea on a pure economic side, because, as I was saying, you do have immigrants coming from North Korea and sometimes crossing the border every day to come to work to China. It's not a huge need, but this also entertains the links between North Korea and China.
All right. And Christopher Hill, did you ever get a sense at any time that the Chinese sort of, in your presence, let their guard down and told you what they really thought of Pyongyang?
Of course. The Chinese are probably no more enthusiastic about North Koreans than we are, but I think does speak to the issue, the fact that the Chinese don't all agree on this, and they have their own internal issues going forward, and they're not prepared to make a course correction in their policy to North Korea. So when you can't agree on changing something, you just kind of keep stumbling in the same direction. But, you know, if you talk to anyone in the Chinese business community, which is a vast community and growing by the day, there's really no patience with North Korea. They know that's part of China's past, not part of their future. I think, though, in China today, though, there is a bit of a kind of nationalism in the land, and not just within the government, but among some of China's 500 million, internet users. A little of this manifests itself in Chinese attitudes to the South China Sea, attitudes that have been quite inflamed to their relations with the Philippines and with Vietnam. And so some of this nationalism, I think, does spill into the Korean Peninsula issue, where I don't think the Chinese are willing to sort of talk to us about the demise of North Korea, the unification of the Korean Peninsula, because I think many of them would regard this as somehow a victory for the United States and a defeat for China. And I think it speaks to some of their very old-fashioned things that they used to talk to Henry Kissinger about in the early 1970s about their fears of Soviet encirclement, except this time it's U.S. encirclement. So it's there's a bit of a growing mountain of mistrust in the U.S.-Chinese security dialogue, and I think this mistrust will spill into whether we can have serious conversations with the Chinese about North Korea.
All right, one final question. Marcus Nolan, we're almost out of time, so very briefly. It's been the year in the Arab world and in places like Russia of the Facebook revolution, social networks and all that. We're here dealing with a country that doesn't have Facebook or Twitter or these kinds of things. So how do you engage directly with the people in a situation like that?
Radio. They do have radios, and one of the things is that the United States, South Korea, Japan, other countries could do a better job of broadcasting to the people. I think you start with radio. Social media is somewhere in the future.
All right. I want to thank you, Marcus Nolan, for joining us from the Peterson Institute in Washington. I want to thank Ambassador Christopher Hill for being with us from the University of Denver in Colorado, Yuni Hong, and Jean-François Di Meglio of the Asia Center here in Paris. Thank you. And thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's time for business here on France 24.